I know you don't know how many times I start and stop these videos and record them before I get one that really embodies or embraces what I want you to know. I can't even count how many times I started and stopped this one because I couldn't get through them without crying. No, I don't mean shedding a few tears. I mean I did the ugly cry. That's a reaction I didn't know I was going to expect, but I don't know why. Because when you get to this time in your homeschool journey, there's a lot of emotions that go through you, not just through you, but also changes in your teen. So although I promise I'm going to try to get through this one, actually complete it, I'm not sure it'll be without tears. But I promise I'll try not to do the ugly cry where you can't even understand what I'm saying. You know, I talk fast as it is because I'm so excited about homeschooling, but I'm going to try to slow down on this one if I can. What I'm going to do, though, is start off with a story. Okay, I want to tell you a story. After I took my son out of public school, and I promised never again to feel that way, not knowing where I was going, not being sure about this is the best choice. Well, we always go to high school. Our husband may, or your husband may even ask, what about high school? And my reply is I always want to tell new homeschoolers, what about high school? But here is the thing. Because you are a conscientious homeschooler and parent, you want to know that by the time you get to high school, you can do this. You would think that high school would be the formative years. And I've learned they're not. They're not. I hear a lot of homeschoolers who say, well, we're going to start homeschooling, but we're going to wait to middle school, or we're going to wait to high school. Okay, their choice. But that's not the time when you get to influence your kids the most. Sure, when they're teens, you can. Don't get me wrong, you can. But the formative years, the younger years, when you're teaching them how to feel about learning, scheduling, that's the time you can correct attitudes. It's harder at this stage, and no, I'm not telling you to give up. We never want to give up on our teens. But what I'm saying is by the time they get this age or stage, you and I both know sometimes they can be a handful is an understatement. So let me explain what I did after I took my son out of public school and said I would never go back again. I wanted to know everything I could. And that is at the next convention that they had close to the big city that I lived in, I went to a workshop about high school. Yep. Your teens are welcomed here. It's about high school. Well, I didn't have my kids with me, but I walked into the workshop. I listened to everything that they said about high school, and I thought, okay, I can do this, in about 7 or 8 years. I'm thinking, okay, by that time I can do this. But then they ask, can those parents come forward now that have kids that are about 14 or 15 so we can help them? I said 14 or 15, how about 4 or 5? But you know what I learned from that, and of course, let me tell you, I just kind of snuck out of that room. I kind of got down the back. I hope nobody saw me leave it, or hope no one was there that I knew, because they knew I didn't have teens at that time. But I learned a valuable lesson, and that is we need to know by the time we get to high school if we can do this. And let me tell you something else I thought. Well, by the time I get to high school, I can just send them back to public school. Like they were going to do a better job than me? No, it didn't turn out that way. And I'm here to tell you, I'm glad I didn't, because even as great as a public school was, great in our area, and all these high ratings and all these extracurricular activities that they had, I still could give my kids better. And I don't mean to say that in an ugly way. I really don't. But when I finish with this workshop, I want you to understand why I say that. Again, nothing beats one-to-one attention. It is truly a unique way to teach a child, and you really understand and feel it at the high school years. Now, moms that have special needs kids or gifted kids, their journey has been different all through. all through the journey. So sometimes the high school years may not be as different. It's just another challenge. But if you have kids that are advanced, normal, like most of us, then the high school years can be quite challenging because it's very different. This is where you want to tailor the information to the child. So I understand that. Let me tell you one more thing too before I get started and jump into some of the how-tos. Something that I fully didn't appreciate when my kids were younger. And even if you're homeschooling and you've pulled your middle school kid out or your teen out, this too will apply. And I'll show you, and I'll tell you how in just a minute. But that is, when my kids were younger, I really didn't appreciate that I wasn't going to be doing all the planning. It just wasn't all on my shoulders. Yes, I talked in the other stages about how from about 5th to 7th grade, it really changes from teacher to supervisor hat. It continues that way more so in the high school years. So, but it's different. It's different because teens become more assertive. No, I'm not studying this. Yes, I want this. I'm not interested in what you want me to do. They start voicing their opinions because they're individuals. And you know, we want them to do that. No, we don't want rebellion, but this isn't set back, spoon feed me, tell me what to learn. They have their own ideas. We want to feed their ideas, but also we want to guide them with what we feel is important to our family and our values. So there has to be a meeting of the minds. Okay, so the point I'm making is that we don't fully appreciate when we first homeschool that it's not going to be just on our shoulders. You really are going to have someone else, a partner, if you will, that will help you, that will tell you, I don't really like this, or I'm not really going into a field. I don't really mean to hurt your feelings, Mom, but I'm not really interested in that. And then you need to think, is this subject that I'm laying out here before my high school teen, is this something that really matters? Is it a value? Do I really need to insist that they study it? Because don't get me wrong. It's not up to my teens, never was, to completely choose everything. It had to have, they could choose everything. Let me reword that. But it had to have our approval. It had to have our approval. And sometimes I would just let things go. And sometimes it's a little bit of a compromise. Okay, I'll let you study this if you dabble in this. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with that. They learn how to interact. They learn how to interact with adults and say, okay, you know, this is kind of a give and take. So even teens, and even more so, see, up until this time, if you've taken your kid out and say they're in middle school or high school, they have been what I refer to, not all the time, but a majority, passive learners. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, they sit back and the teacher says, here's the assignment, and she gives it to them, and then they do it, and then it gets graded, and then here you are. Okay, they haven't been active in their planning. And sometimes when you first start that with them, they don't have a clue. They're like, I don't know what I want to learn. I don't know what I'm interested in. And I'm going to give you a general rule of thumb to guide you and help you and to start your foundation. But the point I'm making is that you want to include them in the planning, even if they don't have a clue. Because what will happen, eventually you'll see that shift. And sometimes it's not easy, but you'll see that shift where they're like, okay, this is my education. I need to be present. I need to be here. I need to decide what subjects I like are the best approach. Do I learn best by watching a video? Do I learn best by being left alone and just have the teacher's manual and figure out the problems on my own for the answers, and then check YouTube if I can't find the answer? Or do I do best by this particular subject going and meeting with other homeschoolers? Do I like that socialization? See, these teens, you want to include them. Now, don't bombard them, especially this is your first year. I know you want to know the answers to these questions, but it's a little bit at a time, because see, they've been compressed. They've been compressed to sit back, do what the teacher said. We want to decompress, de-school, but we don't want to just boing, just open it all up, and then they're just like, oh, I've got all this freedom. It's kind of like how we feel as new homeschoolers. We like all the freedom, but we're just not sure we feel comfortable with all of it. We still kind of think there's somebody that should tell us what to do. Our teens are no different. Teens are no different. Okay, so just gradually discuss it a little bit until they feel comfortable, and it will change. And teens mature fast. Some of you, it may just take a few months. Some of you, it may take a year or so. But just remember, this is all new to them. They just think, okay, give me the books. I'm going to fill them out. I'm going to do my work. I'm going to grade it. You're going to grade it. Here it is. I'm done. That's not what you want. You want them to enjoy the teen years. You want them to be passionate about what they're learning. Yes, I know. Sometimes if they don't like math or writing, it's hard to be passionate about it. But remember what I said. We can always put a skill subject, writing, with a topic they like. Marry the two together, and it makes it go down better. So just kind of remember that too as you go through. Now, let me give you some general how-tos at this stage. Also, I will have a printable or a handout there that you can print that will have vocabulary, if you will, for high school. So you don't have to remember all these terms. I will try to explain them as I go along, but if I say something and I don't give you the definition, it should be there in the printable. So you can have something and look at it and study and review. Okay, so here's the thing about the high school years. There's no great big mystery. It's not a great big secret. It's the same core subjects that you've been teaching them from the beginning. Core subjects are the heart. You don't need any more than that when you start high school, unless, again, your state says you have to teach X number of subjects. But even when they say you have to teach subjects, they don't really say when. They don't say when. And then on top of that, hold that thought for just a minute. Sometimes I always wondered, how do they get so many subjects in? Okay, so I'm going to answer those two questions here. See, when you want variety, especially in middle school or high school, actually this works for the younger years too. I did it a lot with the younger years. And that is to take subjects that you want to dabble in and even just do them for a semester. 3 months, 4 months. You count it half a credit for half the year, dabble in the next subject. That's how you keep variety. So say your teen particularly doesn't like writing, okay, but you have to do language arts the whole year. Well, can half of it be creative writing and the other half of the year be spent public speaking? Maybe he loves to do debates. Most teens love to debate. Let them join the club where they can debate, or co-op. But you see how we can divide that up? Maybe they don't like history, but you know they need to get some of American history in. Well, can we just cover that half the year and then the other half of the year cover something they're interested in? I had used the example before about World War II weapons. I know on one of the subjects we did, that was my case with one of my boys, and we had to get some more U.S. government in. I didn't feel like he really had a good enough grasp on it. See, that's where our teens need our help. And he knew he didn't either, but he just perished the thought that he'd have to study that boring topic for the whole year. We can change it around. This is what you want to do. You want to introduce them to other topics. So what we did was we studied the FBI. We did an FBI unit study. Oh my goodness. When we studied mayhem and murder, he was all into it. He studied about the U.S. government and then Russia and spying. Oh, espionage. He was all over that topic. That was a great history topic. I think I said world history, or did I just say history? But anyway, it was American history that we needed to do for the year. And half of it was a focus on the government. And of course, he couldn't wait to get that done so he could focus on the other half, what he liked. See, so half a credit makes 1 credit for the year. That's what we want to do. We want to think, how can I make these subjects or have them dabble in more? We don't have to have the same subject through the whole year. We can change. We can put a slant on it. If you want to give them, and the general rule of thumb is usually about 120 to 180 hours of work for 1 credit. So here's the thing. Don't get caught up in trying to always calculate hours. Now, some states say you have to have hours. And I do have a student handout that keeps in my student planner on my sister's site, Newbie Homeschooler. It keeps time in 15-minute increments. Some states need that for accountability. But I didn't do that as much as I use this rule of thumb. If they finish the book, if they complete the course, there's 1 credit. If they complete half of a book and half of another one that was a different topic, it's still U.S. history, there's 1 credit. So like I said, 120 to 180 hours usually is for 1 credit. So now some homeschool parents will say, okay, so that's 1 hour a day. So if you don't use a book, how can I do this if I'm not using a book? The general rule of thumb is about 1 hour. But even at that, that's a general rule of thumb, because some parents will say 45 minutes is my standard because this topic is real intense, or that's enough for this topic, 45 minutes. Then I've seen some parents through the years that say, you know what, if my teen studies for 20 or 25 minutes because it's a very intensive topic, that's fine. That's his 1 hour for the day. You're the judge of how hard the material is or what it is. And here's the rule of thumb too. Usually your math and language arts, your core subjects, or skill subjects rather, will be more intense. Now, your core subjects like geography, history, and science, sometimes a lot of parents will say, I'm using 1 hour on that because there's a lot more research, a lot more exploring. Whereas the language arts, okay, if my son or daughter does 45 minutes of creative writing, that's good. That's his 1 hour for the day. He does that for 170 days or 160 days or 180 days, whatever your year is, because it varies. Some programs will say 120 days. Some will say 180 lesson days. They do it 1 hour a day for each of those days. They get their 1 credit at the end of the year. Does that make sense? And remember too, you can post your questions on our group. I will answer them, but I'm trying to give you this general rundown of how the credits work with the subjects and applying flexibility and being diverse. And then also a lot of ones think, how do we get all these subjects in? That's how you get them in. You don't do them for the whole year. And the other way you get them in, and here's another tip, and that is, instead of have a writing curriculum, I have one of my sons that loved history. So we did a twofer. I call them a twofer. That's another secret. It doesn't just work for these grades, it works for any grades. And what do I mean by the twofer? We're doing 2 subjects at one time. We're doing history, so he reads about history, then he outlines, and then he does writing based on the history that he learned. Again, loves it. Now he happened to love writing too, but I had to use these other tips and tricks with another child that didn't like writing, but he liked topics. There's other topics he likes, more science topics. I had another one that likes sports. We can talk about all those topics, and he's into it because he can read about something that interests him and he can write about something that interests him. So in that case, instead of buying a writing curriculum for high school, I invested in more writing reference books. Does that make sense? That was a better investment for me at the high school years because I didn't just have one grad, I was going to have several more behind them. So I thought, you know what, I'll invest in reference books. And that was the best investment. You know, how to do a paragraph, how to do an essay, how to outline, the different types of writing, not just creative writing, but factual writing, narratives. All investing in the how-to and reference books was a better deal for my household. And every household is different. Every household is different. Some teens are not self-motivated. Some teens need everything in one spot for them. You'll know that as you get started, but don't feel afraid to jump out there and do some things different. And then they'll have everything in front of them that they need. Sure, they can find things online, but also try to limit their time that they spent online, because when it was quiet and they're sitting there at the table or in their room, they could have all their reference books in front of them, and it was good to research. It was good to research some of those other things, grammar, outlining, whatever it was that they weren't familiar with, they could research with the reference books. Okay, so normally let me just kind of review so I don't lose anybody. 120 to 180 lessons for the year, 1 hour a day on each subject. By the end of the year, we're talking 1 credit for that subject. So what's the rule of thumb? Well, you're looking at about 5 or 6 credits, sometimes less for each year, depending on what direction your teen wants to go. Early on, you can decide whether it's a career track or a college track. Now, back in the day, 19 and 22 credits was a superb high school graduation requirement. Now, when I didn't have anybody to guide me, I got online and I Googled what was our high school requirements. It was a great rule of thumb to go by. But more and more, the educational world pushes and pushes until they just really stress teens out at the high school level. I encourage you not to do that. They're still young. They still deserve time to dabble in things they enjoy. There's plenty of time when they're working or in college for the weight of the world to be on their shoulders. But keep all doors open. And what do I mean by that? Keep all doors open. Well, sometimes I hear parents say, my kid, he doesn't know what he wants to do. Well, you know what? Half the world doesn't know what they want to do, and they're 40 years old. They still don't know what they want to do. So we don't need to put that pressure on our teen. If they already know and you know what they want to do, okay, good. If you don't, here's a solution. When I say keep all doors open, then you have a math for each of the 4 years. You have language arts for each of the 4 years. And remember, language arts varies. Math varies. You have history for all the 4 years, and you have science for all the 4 years. And also those are the core subjects at the high school level. Math, language arts, history, science. Now they've been adding in foreign language and PE. That's also considered part of high school. But on these subjects, remember, you can vary them, because like language arts, and I have my notes right here, I jotted down a few. It could be English literature. It could be U.S. literature, practical English. It could be research. It could be reporting. It could be writing. And then math, it could be consumer math, business math. And then whatever course you decide, do they take pre-algebra in 8th grade, and then they do geometry, then they come back and cover algebra, and then calculus, statistics, stats. You decide. Business math, what course. And a lot of these subjects will depend on the direction they're going. Now, I do know this is also very important for you to remember, and that is, do not plan all the high school years without, and if your kid is on a college track, don't plan all the high school years without checking with the college first to see what do they need. And don't be afraid of preparing the transcript. And when I mean, what does a college need? You know, most colleges do their entrance just based on test scores alone by the team during the high school years. They just simply say, here's the test scores, and this is what we take. The transcripts are kind of secondary. Not that you wouldn't prepare one, but the focus is more on the test scores. Then and also there's 2 ways to prepare a transcript. There's 2 types of transcript. One, you can do year by year, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year. Another one is by subjects, where you don't really do a year. Yeah, that's a key point here. See, this goes back to what I was saying about why we didn't do high school and public school, because I could offer better. I could be more flexible. One of my sons has a transcript prepared by subjects because he was doing college. Well, actually, the first 2, they were doing college and high school. We didn't want to waste 4 years on high school. They were ready to get on with it. It wasn't pressure on them. They decided, okay, they want to do volunteer, and then they were going to work. Of course, they're learning to drive. And we said, you know what? That's too much on your plate. Let's focus on your education. So you can do a dual enrollment with the community college. What's dual enrollment? It's where they do part high school and part college, and they get college credit by the time they finish high school. After the 4 years, they've graduated both high school and have college credit. Some are ready to do that, and some are mature. You can decide, is my teen mature enough to meet with other adults at a community college? I have a couple that are, and I have one that I would say no. He needed a little bit more maturity because he was still too influenced by what people thought, or, you know, and one of them was ready for community college early, but I wasn't going to have him be in a locker room with other men for PE. Not yet. He had to have a little bit more age on him. That was just my personal take on my child. You know your child, so trust your gut. But I'm telling you these things so you can kind of weigh these options out when you get to high school. Now, that same child was ready by junior or senior year to do something like that, but not freshman, not freshman. I had to wait for a little bit of maturity there to come through. Okay, so they can do dual enrollment. And let me just say one more thing about the college while I'm thinking about it. Some colleges don't want a subject transcript. Some will say we want each year to see what they learned. Okay, and so you want to know ahead of time what the college is going to need before you start preparing it. And you don't need to have a transcript at freshman year. I didn't know what was going to go in transcript, so I had Word on my computer, and so every day what I did was I got onto my computer and I just typed out what my team did for the day, what he read, what he did, how long, and then I learned. I said, okay, I can put that into a transcript. How do I put it into a transcript? Then I learned. So like I said, with one of them, I did a subject transcript, and another one I did by the year. So don't do all this work and plan all of it, number one, without the college, or if it's a career track, that is your starting point. Well, they're going to do this career. Okay, well, what do they need? A lot of certificate programs just say a high school diploma, which is great. There's a lot of merit in a wonderful high school diploma. You can prepare the transcript, the diploma, mama diplomas, mama transcripts, they have teeth. They have teeth. We're not in the dark ages anymore with homeschooling where they don't know who homeschoolers are. A lot of colleges, they really seek homeschoolers because they know they're independent learners. Most of them are independent learners. Most of them are self-motivated. They take care of their business. They do it. They don't need anybody telling them to get their day started. This is what we want to produce at the high school year. But the way we do that is we give them some independence. We allow them some control. Even if they come up with a plan of when they're going to get started and how they're going to work in school or their job. And this is what we always told our teens. We don't mind that you want to do this and you want to go spend your time with your friends doing this and this. You know, and sometimes they come with a really, what I call a wonky schedule. I'm thinking to myself, oh goodness, how are they going to do all this? Nope. I said, you know what? Okay, I'll support that. But let me tell you something. If you can't get school done each day because you're doing da, 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 there ain't none of this da, 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 da. I was very clear. Because see, they need to try these different approaches. They need to try, and they need to learn failure while they're living with you. Because when they're not living with you, they need to be able to make these decisions. And you'll be so glad that you didn't just hold them down, but you guided them. You also didn't allow them to speak to you in a disrespectful way. If they speak to you that way now, how are they going to deal when they're in the real world, as people say, the real world, and they have to work, make a living, get along with someone, get along with a roommate? So set clear expectations. It's not pushing them down. It's not squashing their little spirit when we don't say, you know what, I'm not tolerating that. But we can treat them how we want to be treated, right? We treat them how we want to be treated. But we guide them. They still need your input. This is not the time for a hands-off approach. It was very different. It was very interactive with all of my teens at this age. It was harder in a lot of ways. It was a lot more harder for each of them as they came along. And we did the high school years and we went through all the options that they wanted for electives, and we prepared and we planned, and then that didn't work. We had to scratch that. Then we say, okay, let me come back to the drawing board. Let me do this. And it was hard, but we stayed after it because then they view you like a partner, someone that helps them want to succeed, but they need your guidance. So I'm not saying, oh, what do you want to do? You can ask them that, but give them your help, guidance. They need to know that if they don't know what they want to do, let's do one math every year, but you decide what type of math is it. If they're in a career track, do we really have to do all these types of maths? Can we do something that's practical? How about life skills? Can we study something like that? They have time in college to take these other courses that they need to take. If they're on a college track, then yes, check with the college first. You're going to want to have a progressive math that shows higher level of math as you go through it. Language arts, science, history. That's what I mean when I say keep all the doors open, because they really don't know what direction they want to go if they don't know. Then again, I want to share one more thing with you. In all of this, remember that writing and math, although they're very important, what matters is the relationship. The relationship. Years later, they'll look back, they're not going to remember a workbook, probably a math assignment. They'll remember the times you had together. They'll remember the field trips you went with them on. Yeah, we took field trips in high school. You bet. They drove me to the field trips. It's best time ever. Don't be so focused on the academics that you don't enjoy your team. Get to know them for the beautiful woman or man that they unfold and become. Enjoy the time with them. Sure, they're going to have these knee-jerk reactions when they're going to be disrespectful. And I know it's hard not to respond back to that, but I tried not to, because I realized the times when I had hormones, I really didn't want any people to talk back to me when I said something ugly. You'll know when you just need to overlook it. Maybe they need more sleep, or when you need to tell them, you know what, it's not going to be that way in the house. There's so many things happening here, because what will matter at the end of the journey is your relationship with them, not academics. Now, I don't want you to think, oh, that's the only important thing, because I've always had a high standard for academics. I really feel like in high school is where we can really carve and dabble and explore. And it really started in middle school, 7th and 8th grade. And those grades are the ones you want to start with electives. You can start counting credit in middle school, especially with electives. And then you wait for your core subjects really for high school. And to count high school credit, here's the rule of thumb. It has to be a high school book. I know some parents say, well, we started counting it in middle school. That's okay for electives. But if they're doing high school math in middle school, you count it right then and put it on their transcript when it comes to high school. So the rule of thumb now for college, I see some up to 26 to 28 credits. You divide that by 4 years. How many credits do they need? See, that's how you figure it. Okay, we're just going to use, say, an even number of 24 credits. 4 years, we're talking 6 credits for each year. How can you fill each of those 6 credits? And here's the other thing too. A lot of homeschoolers school year round, but they only count the book as when they finish the book just for 1 year. I did that. We had the book and we could take our time finishing because we schooled year round. We schooled through the summer. My teens really enjoyed their studies. They could really dive into them deep. They could understand. I didn't put the pressure that we have to start by August and we have to end until it came to be their senior year. So then we could plan all the fun parties and decide what was going to be their next goal. And it wasn't until like their senior year that we stayed on track for the August to May normal, what some folks view as a school year. The rest of the time we schooled year round. So there's a lot I've thrown at you here. I have printables for you to explain. I just wanted you to see that high school was a continuation of what you have been doing. And you need to plan backwards. What is their future, and plan back from there. And just remember too, don't get caught up in thinking more is better. It's not, more is not better. We don't need to sock it to them when they get to high school. We want them to dive deep. We want them to explore. And if they don't know what they want to do, one math, one language arts, one history, one science, electives, PE, each year, that's a solid high school graduation plan. So just remember those things, and also remember this time with your team is precious. They'll be gone, they'll be moved out. They'll thank you later as young men or young women for what you've done. So remember all of that when you're teaching these years. And of course, I'm going to help you with any other questions that you have, but I wanted you just to see the overview. I'm always a bird's eye type of person. If I see where I'm going, then I have a plan, then I can dive in also into the details of it. Okay, that is it for this one.